Having explored Earth energies and the biofield, we now arrive at the most abstract layer, consciousness itself. Is there a scientifically supported field or dimension for consciousness? The notion of a quantum consciousness field suggests that what we experience as mind might be grounded in a quantum processes and perhaps connected to a field that pervades the universe. In the context of a 4D hyperuniverse theory, one might argue that consciousness is not produced within the brain alone, but rather as a fundamental aspect of reality, potentially existing in higher dimensional domain and interfacing with the brain. This section examines cutting-edge theories at the intersection of physics and consciousness. We'll look at how quantum mechanics and relativity have been invoked to explain awareness, and how some scientists are extending physical theory to include mind as something emergent from or unified with deeper universal fields, like some of the studies we've talked about from Federico Fagan. A seminal framework in this realm is the orchestrated objective reduction theory, or ORIC, proposed by anesthesiologist Stuart Hamerhoff and physicist Sir Roger Penrose. Hamerhoff and Penrose in Consciousness in the Universe, a review of the ORIC theory, published in Physics of Life Reviews, compiles evidence and arguments that consciousness arises from quantum processes inside neurons, specifically within protein structures called microtubules, and that these quantum events are linked to fundamental physics. The ORIC theory posits that quantum coherence, a state where particles or components behave as a unified wave, can occur in microtubules in the brain, and that collapse of these quantum states, a process that Penrose calls objective reduction, produces moments of conscious awareness. As Hamerhoff and Penrose describe, we proposed in the mid-1990s that consciousness depends on biologically orchestrated coherent quantum processes in collections of microtubules within the brain neurons. These quantum processes correlate with and regulate neuronal, synaptic, and membrane activity, and that the continuous Schrödinger evolution of such processes terminates in accordance with the specific Ducy-Penrose scheme of objective reduction of the quantum state. The orchestrated OR activity is taken to result in moments of conscious awareness and/or choice. In essence, they marry biology with fundamental physics. The mind is born from quantum state reductions in the brain that are influenced by a proposed quantum gravity threshold, Penrose's theory of OR. What makes this truly a field theory of consciousness is that orchestrated reduction is rooted in space-time geometry itself. Hamerhoff and Penrose argue that these quantum collapses are not just isolated to the brain, but are linked to the fabric of the universe. They write out that the OR mechanism is related to the fundamentals of quantum mechanics and space-time geometry. So OR suggests that there is a connection between the brain's biomolecular processes and the basic structure of the universe. This is a profound claim. It implies that consciousness is tapping into the underlying quantum field that composes reality. In their view, consciousness is non-local in a certain sense, although it requires the brain's structure to occur in our bodies. Its source is entangled with a fundamental level of nature, possibly at the Planck scale space-time geometry. By reviewing evidence from many disciplines, quantum biology, neuroscience, cognitive studies, Hamerhoff and Penrose lend scientific weight to the once mystical idea that mind is a fundamental aspect of reality. They stop short of outright mysticism, but conclude in no uncertain terms that consciousness is an intrinsic role in the universe, not an accident or an epiphenomenon. OR is a scientifically relevant to the notion of a consciousness field. It provides a concrete, testable model of how consciousness could arise from quantum events, and it explicitly ties those events to a field-like entity, the space-time geometry of the universe. In a hyperuniverse context, one might interpret this as consciousness residing partly in the fourth spatial dimension, or alternate space, the quantum gravitational realm, and interfacing with our 3D brains. Another perspective comes from cosmology and higher dimensional physics. If consciousness seems hard to fit into our 3D physical world, perhaps it's because it resides in a higher dimension and projected onto our brains. Prominent physicist and consciousness researcher Bernard Carr advocates for such a view. In Hyperspatial Models of Matter and Mind, and Beyond Physicalism Toward Reconciliation of Science and Spirituality, Carr, Kelly, Roman, and Littlefield extends the idea of extraspatial dimensions beyond length, width, or height to include realms that might host mental phenomena. He suggests that our physical and mental worlds are two slices of higher dimensional reality. In this model, the brain is like a four-dimensional interface that taps into hyperspatial mind and domain. Carr argues that certain puzzling features of our consciousness, like the sense of a unified self, qualia, or phenomenon such as telepathy or out-of-body experiences reported in parapsychology, might be explained if the mind has access to additional dimensions, where space and time behave differently. As Carr writes, a proper understanding of the passage of time and consciousness requires the invocation of extra dimensions, beyond the fourth-dimensional space-time of relativity theory. In other words, the linear time and local space we experience might be embedded in a larger dimensional matrix, and our consciousness could be the result of our brains accessing that matrix. Carr connects this idea with modern physics theories that already use higher dimensions. For instance, string theory has 10-dimensional space and brain cosmology. He is essentially building a bridge between science and spirituality by using the notion of a 4D plus hyper-universe as common ground where matter and mind meet. Scientific literature supports pieces of this view. For example, the mathematical theory of Hilbert spaces in quantum mechanics provides an abstract infinite-dimensional space in which quantum states, potentially including a conscious state, are described. It's intriguing to note that mainstream physics has no issue with extra dimensions per se. What Carr and others are doing is assigning consciousness a place in those extra dimensions, which is a bold hypothesis, but not impossible. The scientific relevance of Carr's hyperdimensional theory is that it can potentially explain why consciousness can seem non-local, as in reports of awareness outside the body or memories in near-death experiences, because the mind substrate isn't entirely inside 3D space. It also resonates with the earlier ideas, Rubik's hint that a full model of the human being may need a multidimensional geometry, and Hammerhoff and Penrose's suggestion of consciousness rooted in space-time geometry. If we truly live in a 4D hyper-universe, then ley lines, chi, and consciousness fields might all be connected at that level. The Earth's energy grid, the biofield, and the consciousness field could be different manifestations of higher dimensional structures influencing the 3D world. In summary, the exploration of ley lines, chis, and consciousness through a scientific literature reveals common theme, an interplay between the seen and the unseen, the material and the informational. Ley lines may correspond to the Earth's natural electromagnetic grid and telluric currents, indicating our planet has an energetic blueprint that ancient peoples and intuited modern science is mapping. The concept of chi and the human aura aligns with bioelectromagnetics. Living organisms emit fields, and these fields might be as vital to life as biochemical processes, forming a bridge between mind and body. At the deepest level, consciousness itself may be more than an emergent brain property. It could be rooted in quantum fields and extra dimensions, a cosmic substrate in which our individual minds are immersed, much like eddies in a vast ocean. This convergence of ideas is where a 4D hyper-universe theory becomes a compelling lens. It suggests that what many call metaphysical might simply be physics we don't understand yet. By remaining grounded in empirical research and theoretical physics, we find that these mystical concepts are not in opposition to science, but rather at the frontier of it. The scientific literature we've discussed serves as stepping stones. From geophysics to biophysics to quantum physics, each provides pieces of a puzzle. When assembled, they hint at a universe with more layers than previously thought. A hyper-universe where energy flows in networks, life pulses with invisible light and magnetism, and consciousness could be a fundamental field. It's a vision both grounded and inspiring. Grounded in that it emerges from real studies and data, and inspiring in that it re-enchants the world. As our understanding evolves, perhaps one day the ley lines of Earth, the chi of our bodies, and the consciousness that observes them will all be reorganized as threads in the same grand tapestry of a multidimensional reality. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell like the winners that you are. And I'll see you next time. Bye.